happy to have everybody. All right, welcome everybody. I see we have Jordan and Matt here up on stage. We have this also recording and here on Twitter Spaces, and also not on Twitter Spaces because sometimes Twitter Spaces recordings they get lost. So we have a backup plan just in case. And and we'll go ahead and get started now. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Twitter Spaces here on the official Nervos Network Twitter account. Today, we're going to be discussing CKB Tokenomics with myself. My name is Kylie, and I'm a technical community manager here at Nervos Network. Also, Jordan, he's a senior software engineer, and also Matt. Matt does business development here at Nervos Network and is also one of the OGs here at Nervos Network. He's been here for quite a long time. So definitely happy to have everybody here and thank you for tuning in. Awesome. So just a few disclaimers before we go ahead and get started. We cannot talk about CKB price and we can't make any updates before marketing made them official. So we're not going to be talking about price and we won't be making any announcements that have been already made. Additionally, we are not taking listener questions today. So we're not going to be taking any requests for speakers to come up on stage. We did take a lot of these questions that we're going to be answering from the community, from various different platforms, from Discord, Twitter, Reddit, Telegram, and we'll be hosting more spaces like this and making more content like this as well. So if your question is not answered here, feel free to ask us in our Discord, Twitter, Reddit, any of our other socials, and we'll be glad to help. Awesome. So before we go ahead and get started and start talking about CKB Tokenomics, I wanted to kind of briefly go over what is Nervos Network and how does CKB relate to that. So Nervos Network is actually a public blockchain network, and it's designed to offer a novel solution to the blockchain trilemma. And if you've never heard of the blockchain trilemma, it's actually an issue that all chains are facing right now in the blockchain ecosystem. And the three things in this trilemma are decentralization, scalability, and security. And the issue that all these chains are having right now is that typically when you optimize for one, you lose out on the other. So, for example, the more decentralized, the less scalable. So Nervos Network is out to provide a solution for this so we can have all of those things: decentralization, scalability, and security. And we do this through a novel multi-layer innovative solution. And today we're going to be specifically focusing on our layer one, which is known as the common knowledge base, and more importantly, the token which powers it, CK bytes, known as CKB. So CKB, excuse me. So CKB provides secure, decentralized digital asset storage for our layer one. And our layer one actually provides secure arbitration for all upper layers. And through this flexible programming model, we can actually future-proof for this rapidly evolving blockchain market by building more layers on top of our layer one, as well as upgrading our layer one as well, which we will get to later. And by doing this, we're able to extend the functionality and scalability of the Nervos network, all while maintaining the secure, decentralized digital asset storage on our layer one through CKB. So we also have a layer two out right now. We're not going to be talking about that today, but just really quick, it features an EVM compatible execution environment built on top of a highly performant, optimistic rollup solution. I know that's a lot of technical jargon for all the blockchain developers out there, but basically this means that we offer developers full EVM support with the benefits of the Nervos network, lower fees, faster transactions, and more importantly, the security from our layer one. So to circle back to our layer one, it's actually due for a major upgrade right now. We recently have the hard fork upgrade live on our testnet, and the upgrade will be live on our mainnet quite soon, I believe in May. Jordan, did you want to give our latest upgrade on our layer one a shout out?
Yeah, sure. Well, this is the CKB 2021 hard fork upgrade, and it's called CKB 2021 because it was actually conceived in 2021, and it started entering the early testnet phases back last year. But of course, these things take a while. They had issues they needed to resolve, make sure it was really polished, so it didn't actually hit the true testnet until this year, and it will be coming out, I believe, on May 10th is the actual target. We should have a countdown coming out pretty soon. So anybody out there who's building an application, you want to make sure, especially if it's layer one, if it's doing anything on layer one, you want to make sure that you're compliant with this and compatible, fully upgraded. So the best place to get information for that would be the Nervos, probably the blog website. So that's nervos.org. Right up at the top, you'll see the blog link. Click that, and on that front page there, one of the popular links should be the April 12th posting about the hard fork, and that should give you all the information you need.
Awesome. Thank you, Jordan, for that shout out. I'll go ahead and actually pin a tweet about that soon once we move on to these questions. And so basically what's important to know right now is CKB, the token, provides digital asset storage for the Nervos network on our layer one. So that's where our layer one kind of comes into play here. And CKB can actually be used as a secure store of value like Bitcoin, but it can also be a token behind smart contracts like Ethereum. And an important idea to really note here is that 1 byte of digital storage is equal to 1 CKB. So it kind of, it's like another important feature of CKB really being a function of digital asset storage on the Nervos Network blockchain. It's quite cool. And it's the whole design really promotes a long-term secure sustainability. And we'll go ahead and get into that now. And all right, we'll go. All right, so with the first question, what are the principles, values, and primary goals of CKB? And I'll go ahead and start, and then we'll go around the circle here to Jordan and Matt. Definitely, it's long-term secure sustainability through future-proof development, sustainable incentive models, and sort of combining the best of both worlds, I like to call it, which is like a Bitcoin-like store of value with ETH-like programmable smart contracts. So the important thing to really take into account is that the primary goals and functions of our CKB token is 1, future-proof development, which we'll get into, 2, sustainable incentive models, and 3, kind of combining the best of both worlds. I guess I shouldn't say best of both worlds, but just the pros of Bitcoin and sort of with the pros of Ethereum. And the fact that the programming model for the Nervos network is very flexible as well. We can certainly add more pros to that as time goes on. So it's quite flexible, which makes it very future-proof. And so you know what? Actually, we'll circle around for the next question, actually, because that pretty much answers that question. It doesn't vary too much. Just the important thing to note is that future-proof development, sustainable incentive models, and combining the best of Bitcoin store of value mechanisms with ETH-like programmable smart contracts, those are the primary goals of CKB. So moving on, what is Nervos Network doing to ensure long-term stability? And here we'll go ahead and circle around to everybody. Jordan, so what is Nervos doing to ensure long-term stability?
Right. Well, there's when you really look at the ecosystem, there are so many little things to go in there. We're probably going to have to keep this a little bit general and high level on various things. But really, with the future-proof development is one major component of that, and this is kind of a manifestation of the general goal, which is keep everything sustainable. In order to make things sustainable in the long term, one of the things that is very difficult to get around is hard forks. We see certain other ecosystems that are going through many hard forks, and we're going through a big one here as well. They're absolutely necessary, but anytime you do a hard fork, it is a major endeavor, and it should be so. There's a lot on the line that's at risk. It's a very heavy technical burden, takes a lot of developer time to do such a hard fork successfully, and each time that you do it, you are accumulating a small amount of technical debt. As in, you still have to support all the previous, everything previous to the hard fork still has to be supported because you have that blockchain history. And every time you replay it, you have to play through every single instance of what was going on through consensus to make sure that you actually have a valid chain. So you want to avoid this whenever possible. And so to future-proof this, Nervos, what they did is they went back to the virtual machine itself that's executing the smart contracts, and they took it back a layer. Rather than building a platform, they emulated hardware. They emulated a computer processor in their virtual machine. And what this means is that they are going at the lowest possible level here. And so when there's changes that need to be made, most of the changes are occurring at higher levels, because that's where most of the software changes happen. When things happen in the ecosystem that were just not planned, we saw new changes coming, new innovations that are coming, and software needs us to change. That's usually happening at a higher level. So this is important because that means that Nervos CKB doesn't have to hard fork nearly as much. And that's by design. That's something that we're specifically going for when they architected this system. And so the next thing I think is to touch on would be the sustainable incentive models. And this is a really the deeper subject here on the tokenomics. First, there's the base issuance that we have, which is very, very similar to Bitcoin. Bitcoin often described as deflationary in the long term. But in the short term, like when it first came out, very inflationary, because that's how all the Bitcoin comes into existence. It comes in with a relatively high issuance rate with relatively high inflation. And then over time, I believe it's every 4 years, that issuance cuts in half. And it keeps cutting in half and half and half down the line until it basically cuts off in, I forget, it's 100 and something years. It's pretty far out, but eventually the issuance stops completely. It starts at high, keeps cutting in half. And so if you look at the charts on inflation, they start out high and then they just really start to go down quite a bit and then level off for a long period of time. And Nervos was designed with that as their primary issuance to mimic that same exact pattern, because it is a very elegant way of bringing new coins into existence. It provides, all these new coins provide incentives, high incentives in the beginning to miners to actually provide good security to the network while it's starting to accumulate value. And as more and more value comes into the system, as it gets valued higher, you actually can cut down some of that security over time safely. And that's what that issuance is actually doing. It's a really great system that they put together here. But there's a little bit of a potential issue to it. And that's when you look into the real long term of this, is it actually sustainable? Once you've started to exhaust the supply, once it's hitting it's year 100, let's say, it's way down there, you're getting so few incentives now. Is that enough to continue the security of the network? And this is a question that's still actually actively debated in the Bitcoin community. There are some that believe that the transaction fees will be enough to eventually replace the block rewards completely and will sustain the network. But of course, that's going to mean a lot of fees, much too much for any small transactions, in which case Bitcoin would be basically unusable for the average person. It would be only gigantic whales moving around funds, and then everything else would have to happen at a higher level, at least in theory. But what people do, this is openly debated in the Bitcoin community. Some of the core developers, they don't think that that's actually possible. They think that they're probably going to end up forking down the line and adding some kind of a reward in there, some other kind of a mechanism to keep the chain going and keep it secure. So anyway, with Nervos, we have secondary issues to take care of that problem. This is a perpetual block reward that is set at a very fixed rate, and it just continues to go on basically forever. But unlike some of the other systems out there, like for example, Ethereum has the potential for just inflationary, adding more and more coins out there to pay the miners. Nervos doesn't do that. They use targeted inflation. It's actually the inflation is only accrued on people who are actively outside of the DAO. They're using it for basically storage, and it's accumulated it's charged through state rent, which is something we'll go into that a little bit deeper more, but that's how it's actually doing it. If you would just if you're just a hodler, if you're just trying to hold long term, you stick your coins in the Nervos DAO, and that offsets 1-to-1 exactly the inflation created through secondary issuance. So you're protected. So that means that you are the exact same, just like with Bitcoin, you have only the base issuance, which is affecting you. And in the long term, you are deflationary. So that's the interesting thing about Nervos. It's really got a kind of a merger here. It's an evolution of where Bitcoin started, but it's actually has this model that kind of mimics a little bit of Ethereum in some regards, but it's taken to the next level where it's kind of combined these aspects. You are getting effectively a deflationary supply, but you have something that is much, much longer sustainable in the long term.
So I want to add one one more thing here about sustainability. This is it's kind of tangential, but I think it's an important consideration of one thing that's been debated a lot in the Ethereum community is the changes to what miners are getting rewarded. It's almost arbitrary and just kind of something where certain leaders in the community will be able to push through. We should pay miners more, we should pay them less. And even with the move to proof of stake, this will get even more fluid as yield to stakers has to be incentivized against DeFi or other things that people can put their coins to work for. So you're seeing kind of like power concentrations around changing the consensus rules of the blockchain. And I think with Nervos, we won't see that. I know we're still small and we're growing as a community. So the foundation holds a lot of power. There's other people who hold power in the community now. But over the long term, I can see this going more the way of Bitcoin, where we already know what the issuance schedule is. No one's going to change that. Especially this is about CKB and tokenomics and the case for CKB. Like, I think it will be similar to Bitcoin in that there are certain things that as a community we all agree on, that the issuance schedule as it has been laid out will not change. And I think for a smart contract platform, it's very unique to be able to say that. And I think proof of work has a lot to do with being able to say that. But I see that kind of decentralization of power as an important part of what makes us all sustainable.
Yes, awesome. Thank you both for providing really in-depth answers for this. And it basically is like, how do you jumpstart an ecosystem and set it up for long-term sustainability and security while through base issuance, which is like Bitcoin halving patterns. And additionally, how do you set up long-term incentive for miners, which is essential to keep the network secure? And that is basically through secondary issuance. And it's sort of similar to Bitcoin's block rewards as well, but still different, still very different. And then when you add the Nervos DAO on top of it, there is your incentive and your rewards for all the long-term holders because they're able to shelter themselves from the inflation as well. And again, that inflation is not a bad thing. It actually helps with the overall long-term sustainability of the network. So it's important to kind of keep all of these features in mind when you're judging the tokenomics of a coin. You could always go on coin market cap and just look at the stats, and then that's not quite enough to really make an accurate assessment for how any token, not even just CKB, but any token is going to perform for the long run. You have to really look at the economic features that are also involved. And you know what I like to say is that there's a lot of coins out there that are very successful, last a long time, and they don't even do anything. And they don't even do any of this. So the fact that, Nervos Network is doing all this with CKB is awesome. So, I think we're setting ourselves up for a really good place and to also be in a good place in the long term. And all right. So now I guess, Matt, this is kind of your domain here. How many tokens are in existence right now and how many will ever exist?
So I did a little bit of math prior to this, and I think Jordan and I went back and forth a bit on the details. So these are all approximate numbers. I think one thing I want to put together is a spreadsheet laying out exactly how many tokens are out there, exactly how many have been burned, and because I know it is probably the most common question that's out there. But based on the rough math that I did, roughly about 30.5 billion tokens that have been created and are unlocked today in circulation. There's some other tokens that will unlock for the team and strategic partners in May. That will bring the total in circulation to about 34 billion, I believe. And then other tokens that will unlock at the end of the year to about 40 billion. So we talked about the primary and secondary issuance. So all of that is currently, like every block, those tokens are being created. As far as how many will be created in the long run, eventually, an infinite number. We talked about the merits of locking tokens in the DAO. I think if people hear, infinite supply and they, grow concerned about CKB, they should look into the function of the Nervos DAO, because I think it may give them something to be interested in if that concept of wanting to own a certain percentage of the issuance is important to them. And the Nervos DAO has been created specifically with that in mind, for people who see the long-term value of this coin and want to ensure that they are holding a certain percentage of the issuance. I think there's a chart on a Medium article that I wrote. So the name of the article is A Detailed Description of Nervos Supply and Issuance. And I think that chart goes to about 2040, and I think it's about 80 billion coins in 2040. So I think an important part of all of this is the 1 CKB equals 1 byte concept, especially if people are concerned about the number of coins. The coins all have utility. The 1 CKB allows you to store 1 byte of data on the chain. So the idea that only 80 gigabytes of data can be stored on the blockchain in 20-ish years, I think is an important consideration on those topics of what is the supply and why is it where it is. But I wonder if we'll get to that more later.
Nice. Speaking of which, at the top here in the spaces, I linked a few important tweets, and one of them is about the Nervos DAO and how to also get involved. And also, there's another post about more about Layer 1. And additionally, most importantly, I would say I'm not quite sure what order they can see this in, but it's the second one to the right for me. This is a list, actually a growing list of resources on CKB Tokenomics, all produced by official Nervos staff. This was actually tweeted on the Nervos Education and Events Twitter account. And by the way, for those who don't know, that Twitter account is ran by the official developer relations team here at Nervos Network. And we actually do Twitter spaces there quite frequently. And definitely go check them out and go give us a follow. But yes, this tweet here actually has a list, and it includes the blog post that you were just mentioning, Matt, and also has a whole myriad of different blog posts, also from Jordan as well, going more into detail about these things. So if you want to learn more, definitely check that out. And lastly, and then there's also the tweet just talking more about the major protocol upgrade for Layer 1. So go ahead and check out the tweets at the top, and especially the one list of CKB Tokenomics resources, because there you'll find everything else that you need to know. So, all right, awesome. So moving on to the next question here. Perhaps you actually already answered this. I'm not quite sure. How is CKB being allocated? Matt, did you already answer that technically? It sounds like you kind of did here, but maybe you can add some more to that.
Yeah, I think so. A good question is about how the pre-mined tokens, the tokens of the Genesis block were allocated. All that's on that Medium article, so people can check that out. Then we move into how our coins that are being generated, every block, how those are being allocated, and it breaks down based on how the CK bytes are being used. So, well, I guess first we have primary, we have secondary issuance, which I believe we've covered. Primary is very straightforward. It just goes straight to the miners. The secondary issuance, so any CKB that are being used to store data, the secondary issuance associated with those CK bytes will go to miners. Any tokens that are locked in the DAO, the associated secondary issuance will go to those holders who have deposited in the DAO. And for any CKB that is just liquid and just not being used to store data or being locked in the DAO, that's currently being burned. So in the positioning paper, in the long-term plan for Nervos, those CK bytes can go into a treasury fund eventually. It would require a hard fork to turn that on, so that'd be community consensus around what to do with the secondary issuance that's currently being burned. Yeah, I think that covers it.
Cool, awesome. Wow, we really went through a lot of these questions a little fast here. So I was just checking out some of the questions on the tweets that I made recently on the Nervos Education and Events Twitter account, where I was asking for community questions. So if you don't mind, I'm going to pull a few questions from there just to add more time here. And one, where do you guys see the network going when CKB, let's say, eventually reaches $1? What do you propose will the Nervos Network and the tokenomics really look like at that point? This is a question that we are asked quite a bit from the community, and yeah. So, what would you say CKB will look like if it reaches, or when it reaches $1?
Right. So this is one that's actually been asked to me in private several times, and there's a little bit of kind of guesswork here. Like, we have ways that we see things happening in the future, but ultimately it's up to the community and the developers out there that are utilizing the platform on how exactly it takes shape. But once layer one is the one that's going to be the most affected by this. Like, if CKB is at $1, that means that the minimum size for a basic cell will be about $61. And if you wanted a token, an SUDT token on layer one, it's going to be $141 to be able to have it reside on layer one. Now, it's important to note that fee comes back to you once you take it off chain, right? That's the deposit that has to be basically put down and left there while it exists on chain. And it's used to pay state rent, which we can go into more later. But the original amount of CK bytes that you put down, you get that back once you take it off chain again. So it will probably be used for, usually I'd say high amounts, like, right, for those of us who are trying to transfer dollars around, that maybe even thousands of dollars around, it probably won't be worth it to store that on layer one any longer. Definitely if you have millions of dollars or something, you're holding millions of CKB, yeah, you're probably going to want to keep that on layer one, because the transaction fees and the state rent that you're going to be paying is relatively low to the amount of value that you're locking up. Because layer one is at the bottom of the ecosystem, that is the highest security region, and you want to make sure that your stuff is protected, so it's worth it. Now, if you're moving around, let's say, you're a couple $100, your cash in your wallet, basically, that no longer should be on layer one, in my opinion, because it's going to have a large deposit on it, especially for people who are in some other countries where $141 is an enormous amount of money. They might not be able to pay that deposit, even though they know they're going to get it back. They might not be able to put that down to be able to have space on layer one. So the solution for them is basically to come in on layer two. They're going to come in on layer two and reside there, and they probably won't ever touch layer one. They'll probably be using CK bytes on layer two, but because layer two is different, every layer two that we have in our ecosystem can have different economic properties, and they can be changed up in different ways to basically take different aspects of the blockchain trilemma, right? Like, most of the layer twos are probably going to be focused on much more on transaction volume scalability, so they will inherently have less security to them. But when you're not talking about millions and billions of dollars, if you're talking about smaller sums of money, a lower security system is perfectly fine, because there's also less incentive to attack the system. This is where we kind of see in our ecosystem, the one-size-fits-all approach really doesn't work too well when you're talking about a blockchain that is global. When you're talking about people who are in completely different economic situations, somebody who is making a tremendous amount of money, a whale in some regards, they can afford to pay much, much more because they're moving around a lot of money. Where somebody who's just trying to move around a couple dollars, they cannot afford those fees, but the two of them are trying to compete for the same space. That's why it doesn't work. That's why you need to have some differentiation, some way to actually break these things up. And there's a completely natural market-based order that you can follow when you actually follow what Nervos has laid out, which is a multi-layer system with different economic principles on each of the different layers. So you can have a really customized approach, and you can actually have things move over time. Like, we'll probably see, like, right now, a lot of our NFTs are on layer one. In the future, some of those probably won't reside there, and they'll be moving over to layer twos, or possibly be even labeled layer threes in the future. This all becomes part of the incentive system that's put in place when state rent is actually implemented. people will see that as the price of CK goes up, it doesn't really make sense to reside there, so you just move it to the next layer. And of course, this will be, for the users, a much, much easier, seamless process in the future to make these things happen much easier. And it's just the natural evolution of things, right? Go to the place that makes the most sense at the current time, because Nervos is truly it's a pay for what you use scenario. So if you don't need that level of security, don't pay for it. Go into that layer that makes the most sense.
Yeah, so I want to add that, across, I think, most blockchain ecosystems at this point, that idea of onboarding people at layer 2 is like the only viable future. I think there are some chains that will assert that they can just scale up fast enough that they don't need to worry about this. But I think practically, people coming in at layer 2 seems to make a lot of sense, and the abstractness of Nervos, or the account abstraction, really is built to do this. Some of the proposals on the Nervos Talk forum go into this, where we're basically preparing for that world where people are not touching layer 1, and the layer 1 is not designed in a way that they should have to, and that's really unique for blockchains. I want to add one thing around the idea of CKB at $1. So I think the mining and proof of work becomes a consideration. With any price movement, I think it does become a bigger consideration, which I know it's not really a topic for today, but when we talk about that kind of world, I think it's an important thing to consider, because if that economic incentive is out there, then people are going to compete for it. And right now Bitcoin is in the headlines, and maybe one day Nervos will be in the headlines for this reason. And
Yes, definitely. That is the goal, is for Nervos to be in the headlines for many reasons. And another sort of incentive to add to that is equally as important as all the other incentive features or economic features that Nervos has implemented is the fact that with more apps building on the Nervos network, incentive will also increase with that as well. And that's a huge factor to take into account as well. So you have, the economic features that, we are kind of providing by design. And but then you also have, the community generated incentive as well, which is equally as important. And definitely the economic features that come kind of just by default with the Nervos network. What is really innovative about them is their future-proof ability that goes right down to the software design. I mean, even if you're designing a blockchain or even anything in any type of data-intensive application, Nervos network, and when it comes to building every layer, and also the CKB chain, are implementing these good practices when it comes to designing any data-intensive application as well. And that's essential for the future proofing for more functionality, to optimize decentralization. Again, the blockchain trilemma comes here, and decentralization, scalability, and security, and just making sure that everything from the very start, just as Jordan was saying earlier, with the upcoming hard fork upgrade to layer 1, from the very start, with building on top of the CKB virtual machine as well, and starting at a low level and going from there, that really plays into that. So we have the incentive that we provide, or Nervos Networks facilitates, but there's also the community generated incentive that comes with more apps being built on the Nervos network, and all that can be done through this future-proof design. So those are the really key aspects to take away from here. And thank you both for your excellent answers and super insightful. Just everything. And yes, also speaking of the cell model, and also known as the extended UTXO model, if you want to read more about it, I pinned a tweet there at the top. And again, just in case you are tuning in right now, at the top here, it's actually it's the fourth from the right. The tweet pinned at the very top actually has a list of several CKB tokenomic resources, all created by different staff members at Nervos Network. And if you have a question that is not being answered here, feel free to check out that list and those resources. And additionally, feel free to ask us a question on Discord or on Telegram or in the Reddit or also on Twitter. And we'll definitely be talking more about CKB tokenomics in the future as well. So if your question's not answered here, definitely feel free to ask your question on our socials, and we'll be happy to answer it. Awesome. All right, so moving on here, going to wrap it up. And all right, so we kind of already talked about this, but again, if we want to add anything else, what economic features are in place? We did already cover the state rent and the secondary issuance and the base issuance, and also the Nervos DAO term holder, and you believe, and CKB for the long term. Definitely check out the Nervos DAO. Deposit your idle CKB in the Nervos DAO. There's a tweet pinned at the top on how to do that. So go check that out. And so you have the state rent, secondary issuance, base issuance, the DAO, and of course the core idea that one CKB equals one digital byte of storage. What other economic features are in place at this moment?
Well, I think we can actually go into state rent a little bit more, because we kind of just set that one aside earlier when we were speaking and said we would go into it a little deeper later. So state rent is a very important issue in blockchains today, and what exactly that means is it's the total amount of data that is in the blockchain, the current data that represents everybody's balances, everything, all the dApps out there are doing, your token balances, everything DeFi is doing, everything, all your NFTs, everything that exists at any given point in time is the information that's sitting in the state. Now, this is getting bigger and bigger for all blockchains, and this grows with adoption generally. And there's a lot of chains out there that you can actually see them fluctuate. They're actively tracking it. Like Bitcoin there's charts out there I've seen where you can see the state of size going up and down depending on how balances are going, how many people actually have an active balance, or are they consolidating their balances together. And the same can be said for Ethereum, but overall the trend continuously goes up. And the reason this is a problem is because the larger the size of the state, the larger the computer resources that need to be provided in order to keep it running. When we're talking about decentralization, we're talking about putting this on a lot of different computers, right? We want to put it on thousands of computers around the world. We want to give it as much redundancy as possible. The larger the burden to maintain the state, the smaller amount of participants that are going to take part in that process, because it's going to increase their costs. So nothing is free. Nothing is ever free, especially with blockchains. There's always a cost to it somewhere. It's where does that cost show up? And effectively, like if you look at Ethereum, where they have a state that's kind of bloating out of control. It's a big problem in there. It's showing up in the fees. The fees are partially very high because it's taking a lot of computer resources. I believe that Ethereum, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I believe Ethereum nodes used to be able to run on a Raspberry Pi, but now it's not even close to being able to do that anymore. Whereas Bitcoin still is able to run on a Raspberry Pi, and Nervos, the main CKB node, can also now run on a Raspberry Pi, I believe, with the newest version that just came out and that supports ARM. And in order for that to happen, in order to be able to support this low-end hardware and make it easier for people around the world to run a node and keep this thing decentralized, it needs to be, that computational burden needs to stay lower. There needs to be some kind of an incentive to keep it low, or else people will just throw data out there and it'll just completely blow it out of control, and then it ends up centralized again. Because there's no reason for people to put in additional money to keep it decentralized, right? So anyway, this is what I'm trying to say here is, like with Ethereum, when they first started that chain, they weren't really thinking deeply about this. They were focusing on other issues, on making it easy for the user. And there is a gas fee incentive, I believe now, for reducing taking some data off of the chain, taking it out of the state. But for whatever reason, it's not utilized by the developers. And Vitalik actually made a statement fairly recently that he's proposing they remove it entirely, meaning that once you put data onto the chain one time, you pay your fee, it's supposed to reside there forever. in theory at least, right? And this is another problem that, again, doesn't make sense. How could you possibly pay a fee one time and somebody agree on the other end to host your data, keep it safe forever, right? They've already gotten your money. They don't need to, they could just throw your data away. They already took your money, right? There's no incentive there. There needs to be something perpetual. And so this is where state rent comes in. State rent is a fee that's being paid to miners to secure your data, and it's paid on every single block. And it's paid only for the data that's actually residing on chain, that's residing on the chain. So earlier when I said, when you want to put like 1 byte of data onto the chain, and it requires you to hold one CKB, right? That's the deposit that allows you to put 1 byte of any data you want on chain by having 1 CKB. And then when you take that data off the chain, you get your CKB back. That's you're getting your deposit back. That's your incentive to take your stuff off of the chain. We only want the most important stuff on chain. That's a really big distinction here, because if you don't do that, you end up like some of the other blockchains out there that have thousands and thousands of completely useless junk tokens sitting out there. And they're sitting out there forever now because there's no method, there's no incentive or reason for them ever to take them off. And so this is a computational burden that is being handed down in their system indefinitely with no solution. So Ethereum is trying to address this. Like this has been a very open debate in there. How are they going to address state rent or implement some kind of a state rent system to fix this? And unfortunately, there's no good solution in Ethereum. It's probably going to come on the back of the developers at the contract level, meaning that if you are a developer, you are responsible for the state rent of all your users, which means that you have to charge your users. And that's a very difficult thing to do on the contract level, especially with the way the models work now, where nobody's even thinking about this stuff. This is not on their minds, right? They're concerned about getting users on the system. And especially if you have a couple hundred users, the state rent isn't going to be much. It's not going to matter. But if your dApp blows up, if now you have hundreds of thousands of users on the system, and you're responsible for paying the state rent, this could be a very, very big problem for you as a developer. It could be something that is the make or break point for your dApp. So that's why this is such a big movement for Ethereum in the coming future. Is like, how is this actually going to be implemented? Some people I've actually talked to think it's never going to happen. They've actually said like this would cause such economic disruption to do this, that they expect the can to somehow be just kicked down the road indefinitely, and they're never going to agree on a proposal. Whereas Nervos right now has actually implemented a system that's really elegant. And that, Matt, I see you unmuted. You want to explain?
Yeah. When you said it's never going to happen, that seems to be what's happened. I think so I went through kind of like old RFCs today, and a lot of when we're, I guess early days of Nervos was just like no to sharding, like we won't do sharding. And I think like over time, other chains have kind of followed suit. I mean, Polkadot, Near, and Harmony, I think those are the only ones that kind of pursue this sharding idea. And the Ethereum really is, I guess Ethereum 2 will look very different from Ethereum 1. And I don't think it's widely understood kind of like the divergence between those systems. But the thing that I take from it, in reference to Nervos is like Nervos is meant to adapt to whatever the prevailing designs and priorities are in terms of blockchains. And I think like Nervos will be able to become a system more like newer blockchains just because of its low level nature. And I think when I look at ETH2, like the concept of state rent will not be there. It'll just be different other compromises that are made as a result of having no economic incentive around storing data. And there were recent proposals in this realm. But yeah, I think I echo your points there, Jordan, that this is this idea that everyone has to store this data forever. And how are we going to economically account for that? It has been solved in Nervos. It hasn't been solved anywhere else that I'm aware of. I think on Near, there's some sort of a fee, like Near may have some sort of state rent kind of thing. But it's just an open problem, similar to Bitcoin with the block reward. It's just an open problem that's out there, and people will continue to hack around it. And it's something that's solved here, which we don't get too much credit for that. But it's great when you've anticipated problems. It doesn't make headlines that you've taken care of problems that will arise in the future. But it is nice to know that we won't have to account for this. It's all just taken care of.
Yeah, and I'll add a little bit more to that, which is prior to me finding Nervos, I mentioned this in some interviews before. Like, one of the reasons that I ended up coming to Nervos was I read the tokenomics of the project, and I found them to be really elegant solutions to the problems which was largely being ignored. And at the time, I was actually in some other ecosystems, and I was going around and I was trying to bring up these problems, and nobody wanted to listen. Now, I know that there are a select few out there in the ecosystem that are concerned about these problems, but the majority were not. And they didn't want to hear it. I had put together a white paper on some improvements, and nobody wanted to have anything to do with it. It was just the general attitude of, we're going to kick this down the road, and just somebody's going to figure it out someday, right? Just the hope, right? That somebody will just do something about it. And then I read the Nervos paper, and they had solved it beautifully in a way that I had not even conceived. I was nowhere even near that route. And the reason why I could not see that is because I was locked into the account model of Ethereum thinking, whereas the UTXO type model, which Nervos had adopted, allowed it to be solved so much better. And I hadn't even thought about going that route. And that's really the beautiful thing about that. But when you really look at what does this mean? What does this mean for Nervos in the future? It means that not only are we solving this problem, we're starting to think about the next problems that are coming. Because state rent, it's a big problem for existing chains, and even though we have the solution, it's not. I'm not going to say that it's easy to work with sometimes. Because obviously, when you want to create a token on chain, you have to have the CKB deposit. Well, this is a little bit of a cumbersome thing for the user. This will get easier over time, but this is an obvious challenge that we actually have to look at actively. And another part of that is we need to make sure that everything that we are putting on chain is as small as possible, because layer 1 is designed to be the highest security and the highest decentralization. And to make that happen, we need to keep everything small, right? Nothing's free. You got to remember that nothing is free. We need to make our system as efficient as possible. And so if you start to look at some of the standards, like the NFT standard that's used for most of the NFTs out there on Collect right now, the next version of that, which has been proposed, and I think is actually in development right now, has some changes in it to allow it to take up a lot less space on chain. In the order of, I think I don't remember the exact number, but it's something like 150 bytes will allow you to hold as many NFTs in there as you want, like potentially millions of them if you're a huge collector, in a single 150 byte space. That's not the exact number, so don't hold me to that. It's something like that. But where it was previously, it would have been like 150 bytes per NFT. It's now 150 bytes for as many NFTs as you want. Now, this is a huge innovation here that you will not see anywhere else in any other ecosystem. And the reason you won't see it is because they're not even thinking about it yet. So while we're definitely trying to play catch up on certain aspects, you got to realize here, on the tokenomic aspect, Nervos is way ahead of everybody else.
Nice. That was an excellent breakdown. Honestly, round of applause for these gigabrains up here on stage. And I definitely agree. Nervos Network is doing a lot. It's doing a lot more. Like I said earlier, there's just a lot of tokens out there that don't really do anything, and they've been around for a long time, and they're still around and they're still kicking it, and they don't do anything. So, Nervos Network certainly does not get enough credit. That's why the developer relations team here at Nervos Network and the community teams are expanding the kind of crop or spread the word of all of this. So that's basically my job here, and and the growing community team at Nervos Network's job. So you'll definitely be hearing a lot more about this for sure. And awesome. That was an excellent breakdown. So before we go ahead and conclude, comparing CKB to Bitcoin and Ethereum, which we did plenty of times throughout the spaces here, but just a quicker summary of some of the pros of Bitcoin and pros of Ethereum, and maybe even the cons of each that CKB has implemented for itself. I kind of like to say that CKB is like Bitcoin in the sense that it can effectively match long-term deflationary store of value. Whereas it's also like Ethereum in the sense that tokens can also represent the programmable smart contracts. So you have that entire smart contract platform as well with CKB. What else would you both add to this? And I know we kind of went over this already, but it's quite technical too. So it also helps to just explain it, more than once. Why not? And that will be our last question before we go ahead and conclude. So yeah. How does CKB compare to Bitcoin and Ethereum?
I think inheriting things from Bitcoin, like proof of work or the idea that anyone can run a node, are very important. I think we've seen a lot of smart contract platforms make different decisions, and I think it's important to have an option that maintains these elements of Bitcoin that got us here. I don't know. I don't know if I'd pick Ethereum in terms of a smart contract platform to compare it to. It seems like a very different animal. But it also does, create tokens, do smart contracts, things like that, build systems on top of it.
Nice.
Yeah, let's see. I can add a little bit to that. So we know that Bitcoin is getting global adoption, global recognition, especially from nation states like El Salvador. Part of the reason why it's getting that is because it is that deflationary store of value. It does have that very clear monetary policy, whereas Ethereum doesn't really have that. It's kind of their tokenomics is kind of a work in progress, really, and it keeps changing over time. I like the direction it's going, but it's not set in stone. The way that Bitcoin is. Bitcoin technically not set in stone either, but it's much, much more clear, right? They have a definition. They have a path that they are following now. And so Nervos is very much similar to that in that regard. It's already been laid out. We know how it's going to execute. And of course, just like I said with the other two, it's not 100% set in stone. None of this is, because it's all software. It would take an enormous amount of consensus in the community to hard fork away from that and do something different. So just like with Bitcoin, it's probably not going to change, at least not for a very, very long time, effectively decades. Now, in terms of being like Ethereum, I disagree with Matt a little bit on this, even though the programming smart contract platform, the underlying a way that things operate is very different from Ethereum. I'll say that. But ultimately, the goal on what they're trying to accomplish is pretty much the same types of things, especially today, where we're definitely in the early days of what blockchains can do. When we're talking about DeFi, we're talking about NFTs. It's kind of the same thing. So, I mean, it's accomplishing that type of stuff, but it's got the Nervos spin on it, which is, again, some of the stuff I mentioned. To make it sustainable, it has to be absolutely the most efficient models possible. And you'll see that all through the Nervos smart contract platform, built into the deepest layers on the way it actually even executes. The programming models are designed to inherently be much, much more efficient than you'll see in the account model, which is used by Ethereum and other chains like Ethereum. So this is why when at the very base layer, we did not want to put the EVM there, even though it's technically, I think there's actually some proof of concepts there and it's used for backup, but we don't want Ethereum contracts operating on layer one because it's inherently less efficient than what we've actually designed, and the way that our platform can operate much more efficiently on layer one. So that kind of stuff gets all moved to layer two, where it doesn't kind of muck up the works, I would say, for the decentralization and security aspects. But for sure, like when you start to look at these two more and more, and I'm sure we'll do more talks on this in the future, you'll see that the engineers behind the the concepts in Nervos at their deepest levels, it's incorporating different features from the Bitcoin ecosystem, from the Ethereum ecosystem, and it's really taking those best features where they made sense, and it's incorporating them, as well as putting the new spins on what we see will be the future challenges that are trying to be addressed.
Nice. Thank you, Jordan and Matt, for that excellent breakdown of how CKB compares to Bitcoin and Ethereum. And that finishes up our Twitter Spaces here. But before we go, I'll go ahead and provide just a really general overview, a recap of what we talked about here. And just FYI, this will be available. This is a recording right now, so you can also listen to it on Twitter. And I will say, though, we've had some issues recently with these recordings not showing up afterwards, but we did get a backup recording of this as well. So this will be available whether on Twitter or also on YouTube. This will be available. So yes, keep that in mind. So, all right. So just a very general overview of what we talked about here. I know we talked a lot of technical jargon. Perhaps we don't all understand. So just know at the very top here, one of the tweets that we pinned, it actually starts with, where is it? This is it. Okay. This list is a growing collection of resources on CKB Tokenomics, all produced by official Nervos staff. Take a look at that list. That list has a whole bunch of resources written by Jordan, written by Matt, and more who work at Nervos Network that go into deeper detail about CKB Tokenomics. So definitely make sure to check that out, as well as the other tweets that are pinned at the top here. And so definitely check that out if you have more questions. Additionally, feel free to ask us questions on our other socials, whether it's Discord or Reddit or Twitter, or in Telegram as well, whether it's us who will be able to answer your questions or perhaps other community members. Feel free to ask your questions there if they were not answered here. But yeah, just a general overview. Nervos Network is a public and open source blockchain network. You can go on GitHub and see all this code for yourself. And initially it was designed to offer a novel solution to the blockchain trilemma, which is optimizing decentralization, scalability, and security without costing the other or sacrificing the other. And Nervos accomplishes this through an innovative layered design. And today we talked mostly about layer 1, which is known as the common knowledge base. And that is powered by the CKB tokens, known as CK bytes as well. And CKB can be thought of a form of digital asset storage on our layer 1. And our layer 1 actually provides arbitration for all upper layers as well, and is due for a hard fork upgrade quite soon. The latest upgrade is actually live right now on testnet, and it will be live on the mainnet quite soon, just in a few weeks. We also currently have a layer 2 right now, and the layer 2 is an EVM compatible environment built on top of a optimistic rollup solution. And basically that means that developers can develop on it with full EVM support while benefiting from the Nervos network, whether it's like lower fees, faster transactions, and most importantly, decentralized security from our layer 1, powered by the CKB token. So that's just a quick summary of CKB. And some of the key components of CKB is its future-proof development. That's definitely one of the key core concepts from the very beginning. That starts with, developing on a low level on the CKB virtual machine and sort of going up from there and implementing all of these good practices that any developer would want to implement in any data intensive application, whether it's a blockchain or not. So just, developing from the very start with future proofing in mind, looking into the problems that other chains like Bitcoin and Ethereum are facing, offering novel solutions to those. And additionally, looking forward to the future as well. As Jordan was saying, we are also looking ahead as well as providing solutions for the past. And most importantly, 1 CKB equals 1 byte of digital storage. So that's the one key thing to keep in mind, is that CKB is digital storage, essentially, on our layer 1. And that about sums up everything here. And just a few shout outs, unless Jordan and Matt, if you want to add anything, I'm just going to give a quick shout out here for our hackathon right now. We have a hackathon going on for another 2 weeks. And I pinned a tweet about it at the very top here. It's our Web3 World Championship Hackathon. Kind of went with a really light, like Olympics theme, just because the Olympics were going on right when it started a couple weeks ago. Definitely go ahead and check that out. We have 4 different